Hey guys, welcome to the Sim Racing Paddock. I'm William Marsh, and next to me is my main PC rig that I have called the Black Beauty. So this is my main PC for gaming, for streaming, and for editing. So this is basically my all-in-one workhorse, and I have been using it pretty hard for about 3 years or so ever since I built it. So when I first built this computer, I put it with a Ryzen R7 1800X with 16 gigabytes of RAM and a couple various storage options in this. So now I'm feeling it's a bit of a time to upgrade. So what I've done is I purchased the Ryzen R9 3900X. So I know what a lot of you guys are going to be saying. Why are you going with a 3rd gen Ryzen when the 4th gen is likely just a few months away? Well, my reasons are basically twofold right now. So my first reason, and the most important, is that actually the 3rd generation Ryzen is compatible with my current X370 motherboard. So my motherboard I have is the MSI Gaming Pro Carbon. So basically what MSI and other motherboard manufacturers have done is actually releasing beta BIOS drivers for older generation motherboards. So even though this was a 1st generation Ryzen motherboard, they released this BIOS update to actually make it work with the 3rd generation Ryzen. Now for 4th generation, all bets are off. I'm going to hedge my bet and say likely 4th generation Ryzen will not work with this 1st gen motherboard. And now also for this 1st gen motherboard, I'll likely be missing out on functions such as a PCI Express 4.0 generation and other advanced X570 motherboard functions. But I'm honestly perfectly fine with that. And if I ever wanted to upgrade to an X570 motherboard or something like that, I could just upgrade that and move my 1800X CPU into one of my other systems. So with that being said, I am going to be upgrading to this 3rd generation Ryzen 9 3900X, also because it was on a great sale. So right now I was able to score this CPU for about $420. Normally it's around the $500 mark, and yeah, that's a little steep for me, but $420 is pretty nice. So all things considered, that is going to be the main upgrade in the system. I am also going to be upgrading my RAM. So as I mentioned, this is my main workhorse computer for editing and streaming in addition to gaming. And I've been running on 16 gigabytes of RAM ever since I first built this computer. The downside of that is video editing is very RAM intensive. So when I'm doing my rendering and my streaming and also my video editing in itself, it quickly fills up that 16 gigabytes buffer, in addition to having to also manage other applications and processes in the background. So that is another thing that I am going to be swapping out. Another thing I am going to be adding to this system is a NVMe 1 terabyte solid state drive. So my main boot drive on this system, I believe, is a 256 gigabyte solid state drive. And then I also have I believe it's a 5 terabyte Western Digital Black 7200 RPM hard drive. So that is where I mainly store my footage that I've already made, or also my games. The downside of having the games on a hard drive nowadays is the load times can get pretty hefty, especially with some of the older, somewhat poorly optimized games, such as iRacing can feature a long load time, and rFactor 2's load times can be downright atrocious. So I am going to try to move quite a few of my games over to this 1 terabyte solid state drive and see if that might also help improve load times. So yeah, that's basically what I'm going to be doing with this system. And also, first off, we are going to do a quick clean of the system. So we'll get that done and then get this puppy opened up. right, so we got the system on its side and we are just about to open up the system. And first off, yeah, this system brought out a lot of dust. Thank goodness for dust covers. That's what just about a year of working in a garage, that'll do. But yeah, so we got the system on its side, got the exterior and some of the interior cleaned out, and we're going to take a look at the system. Okay, so now that I have this side panel removed for the computer, you can take a look inside and see what I have. So I have the Ryzen 7 1800X installed on the computer right now. We're going to be removing that and replacing it with the Ryzen 9 3900X. And again, the reason I wanted to go with this generation and the 3900X is it is still compatible with the AM4 architecture. So I can use the same CPU cooler with 0 modifications. But theoretically, if it didn't work, I could also swap to the Wraith cooler that comes with the 3900X. And then also you can see right here, I have my G.Skill Trident Z RAM, 16 gigabytes of it. That's coming out of the system, getting replaced with my Corsair Vengeance RGB 3200 megahertz, 32 gigabytes. So that is also going to be in. Also, you can't see right now, but I do have the NVMe slot on this motherboard, and that is where my Sabrent Rocket 1 terabyte solid state drive is going. Also, you can see my GeForce RTX 2070 here. That is one of the parts that is going to be staying in this system. So, without further ado, let's remove the CPU cooler and get to the juicy CPU inside. All right, so the CPU cooler is off right now. And you can see that at the bottom is some of the residue of the thermal compound. You don't want to use old thermal compound when swapping out CPUs or basically any time you remove the cooler. So what I have right here is a paper towel with isopropyl alcohol. And that is basically what they recommend for cleaning off anything that has thermal compound on it. The great thing with isopropyl alcohol is that it is non-conductive, or basically, so it will help prevent things such as circuit board shortage. You never want to clean computer components with water. That is one of the things you basically, that's one of the main no-nos. So yeah, just clean off the copper bit of this cooler, because that's where all the heat gets transferred to, and boom, pretty darn shiny clean. So you can also see the same thermal compound on the CPU. So what we're going to do is another paper towel, get the isopropyl alcohol, and wet the paper towel with the isopropyl alcohol, and then we will wipe off the thermal compound. And then we will remove the CPU. And there we go. The thermal compound is now off of the CPU. And for Ryzen, you can lift up this lever, and then the CPU should just come out. Yeah. And then the CPU just comes out. There is our CPU. So now, we are going to put this in a safe spot and make sure not to damage any of the pins on this, because I might still want to use this in the future, and we will move it aside. All right guys, so now it is time to install the Ryzen 3900X. So we remove the top of the box, and at the very top is the chip. So right there, 3900X. So what we can do with this is we are going to open up the plastic wrap on it. And here is our chip. Very nice, very nice. Gonna take a quick look. Yeah, no bent pins or anything, perfect. So, right here, that's where the CPU is going to go. And we are going to line up the arrow on the bottom with it. So just line it up, set it down lightly. You don't need to apply any excess force. It will just fall into place. And then bring the arm down and boom, CPU is in. All right, so now it is time to apply the thermal compound. So I'm using a thermal compound from Noctua, the NTH1. This came with my Noctua cooler that I'm using with my Intel system. But yeah, so for the thermal compound application, you don't want to put much at all. Some people say the line, and that is, it might be a little more than I need, but I don't think that's truly too much. So at least that is enough that should give decent coverage over the CPU. So now we take the cooler and we'll put these cap screws on. All right, all 4 screws are tight and the new CPU has been installed and the CPU cooler has been put back on. So that is step 1 of my computer improvement. Let's go to step 2, and that is upgrading the RAM. All right, so in front of us, we have the 16 gigabytes of G.Skill RAM, as well as the 32 gigabyte Corsair RGB RAM we are going to be replacing it with. So to remove the RAM, it's pretty simple. You have 2 of these levers on each end. You push them down and the RAM comes right out. So we do that for one, we do that for another, and we pop it out. Without further ado, let's open up this RAM, and oh my gosh, this is a beefy RAM kit. I've never actually had RGB RAM in any of my systems, so first time for everything. So one of the things you'll notice is there are 4 slots of RAM, 2 slots of, or 2 sticks that I'm using. Theoretically, I could mix and match, have all 4 slots used. For now, I'm just gonna go with the 32. I might move these 16 to my secondary system. So yeah, one thing you'll want to do as well is do it in the every other slot, because that is how dual channel memory works, and that will give you the best performance for your RAM. So to install it, you will basically, you have to push really hard in the RAM. You'll want to line up the slots that the RAM have. So here you see the slots. So that slot in the middle between the 2 bits of RAM, you want to line that up with the slot on the computer. So we are going to be placing the second stick in, line it up, push, and you hear the clicks. Those are the levers popping back up, and boom, now we have 32 gigabytes of RAM in our system. All right, so last but certainly not least, we are installing this Sabrent 1 terabyte solid state drive into this NVMe slot. And I always am astounded by how tiny these drives are. That is a tiny, tiny hard drive, or solid state drive. So yeah, that is what we're going to be installing into the system. And yeah, so what we have to do first is there's that small screw there. We need to remove that small screw. So now that we have the screw removed, we can install the Sabrent drive. So you line up the slot with the drive, and then you'll push down, and that screw that we just removed, we will be using to lock in the drive. All right, so now we have officially upgraded all our components, and now we are going to be putting the computer back at its spot, and we are going to be benchmarking, comparing to what the previous system was. But first, we definitely want to make sure that everything is working. So let's go to the back garage studio and see what happens. All right, guys, so we have the computer back in the studio and we are about to fire it up for the first time. Fingers crossed that it posts. All right, it looks like it is booting up all right. My thought is if something's going to happen, it's going to happen on the left screen because that's where the BIOS would come up on before. And it looks like it's taking a moment. Wait, I see a dot. That's positive. Hearing no beeping for postcodes. Oh, it looks like it is up for a first boot. Except, what is going on here? Hold on. There's that dot again. Come on. Let's see if we can enter the BIOS. Or is it just going to boot straight into Windows? All right, that might be a good thing at least. And we're in Windows. Awesome. So it looks like I need to recalibrate my graphics driver because it's not recognizing any of my other screens. But hey, we are in Windows right now. All right, I didn't do anything, but now all three screens are working. So that's a plus. My mouse is still not showing up. So I might do a reboot real quick and see if the mouse is at least recognized in the BIOS, but I also want to make sure everything on the system is being recognized. All right, so we have the BIOS working right now, and you see, if you are familiar with the MSI BIOS, this one is less flashy. That's apparently because actually MSI had to trim down on the UI of the BIOS to make room for all the features that the new 3000 series Ryzen produces. But yeah, so we can see both RAM sticks are being recognized. We see the Sabrent 1024 gigabyte solid state drive. And yeah, so it looks like just about everything is recognized. And then, yeah, CPU at 3.8 megahertz or gigahertz. That is the stock speed. So yeah, it looks like everything is working. The mouse is being recognized in the BIOS, so that's good at least. So we are going to reboot. And yeah, we'll see if it's working now. All right, so it looks like everything is working. We have our Ryzen 9 3900X right there. We see 31.9 gigabytes of RAM. So yeah, and then we saw the Sabrent 1 terabyte receiver. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some benchmarks and make sure everything is working well.
All right, guys, a few days have passed. I have cut my hair. And it is time for us to take a look at these benchmarks. And first off, I'm just going to get the TLDR out of the way. I am blown away by the performance gains in this system. I was expecting a relatively conservative, relatively moderate performance boost, but nothing to the extent of what we got out of this. So I did a few tests, one synthetic and a few real world tests. So let's get the synthetic test out of the way, and that was Cinebench. So for Cinebench with the Ryzen 7 1800X, I got a score of 2,995. A decent score for that chip, but nothing compared to what I got out of this Ryzen 9. This Ryzen 9 got a score of 7,146. That is over 2.3 times higher. That was astounding to look at, but also take into consideration that is a synthetic benchmark. So how does this chip perform in the real world? And I gotta say, it performs pretty darn well. So for my first real world test, I did a rendering test using Adobe Premiere Pro. So for Adobe Premiere Pro, I pulled out my project file for my Monster Truck Madness 2 retrospective video. So one of the reasons I wanted to pick out this video specifically was because I had a lot of video clips on it. I had the voiceover, I had an underlying music track, and also I had a few video effects that would definitely tax the CPU. And that really was the case. I utilized two rendering styles for each combination. I utilized the version that utilizes the full brunt of the rendering workload on the CPU, and then also the one that offloads some of that processing onto the graphics card. So for the Ryzen 7, with the full workload being put on the CPU alone, I got a time of 14 minutes and 45 seconds. That was roughly twice the length of the actual video. Now on the Ryzen 9 though, I got a render time of 8 minutes and 15 seconds. That is just about 30 seconds longer than the initial video itself. And that's with none of the workload being offloaded onto the GPU. Now, when we were on the GPU, we got better results on both sides. So on the Ryzen 7, with part of the workload being offloaded onto the GPU, we got a render time of 6 minutes and 30 seconds, which was faster than real-time rendering, which is pretty darn impressive in itself. But when you take the Ryzen 9 into account, that rendered the video in 3 minutes and 50 seconds. That's over double time rendering. That is astounding. That is amazing. I am just blown away by that performance. And for the price, I definitely feel like it was a worthwhile investment. So the last testing I wanted to do was a bit of a mix of testing of all the upgrades across the board. And that was load times in rFactor 2. Now, as I mentioned, rFactor load times can be downright atrocious, especially when you're loading up a new car and new track combo and it has to load shaders into the cache and things like that. So I thought this would be a great way to test things out. So what I did was I did fresh installations of rFactor 2. I did a fresh one on my Ryzen 7 system, and then I did a fresh one on the Ryzen 9 system, and I did that on my solid state drive. So when I looked at this, my first launch of rFactor 2 on my Ryzen 7 system was 3 minutes and 32 seconds. Now, that is the time from me pressing click on the launcher to when the menu appears. Now, granted, the second and third launches were much quicker, 36 seconds apiece. So that was pretty tolerable, I'd say. But the Ryzen 9, the first launch was 27 seconds. Jeez. I mean, I don't know really what else to say from that. That is just astounding. Fresh installation, rFactor 2. And then the second and third launches were even more impressive. 16 seconds each. Now that, I gotta say, is pretty great. But then when I get to loading a car and track into a 30 car practice, that is where things were a little less impressive. So when I did those, I did a test on the Ryzen 7, and it was 3 minutes and 10 seconds to load the first time. The second time was 1 minute and 43 seconds. So that was one thing I found kind of interesting. So on the Ryzen 9 on a solid state drive, that was a 2 minutes and 47 second load time, the initial time. The second time was 1 minute 18 seconds, and the third time 1 minute 18 seconds as well. So there was a noticeable improvement, but my theory is that the improvements to the loading screen are a little offset by the deprecated code and things like that. So I'm hoping that maybe as rFactor 2 progresses and advances, the load times might go down a little more. But yeah, I'd say it's a little bit of a lesser return when you are going to a higher end system. But that's more due to, I think, the game itself rather than the actual system. Because I did also do a little bit of testing in Assetto Corsa Competizione, and that was actually 6 seconds each time to load the car and track into a practice. And that's just mind-blowing. But also on the flip side, that was both on the Ryzen 7 on a hard drive, as well as the Ryzen 9 on a solid state drive. So yeah, you'd get those improvements either way, but yeah, at least there is some improvement on the Ryzen 9 on the rFactor 2 side, but it's mainly more brute forcing itself past some issues in the sim. So yeah, with all of that being said, I just gotta say it again. I am blown away by this performance. I feel like with everything in this system, I was able to do better rendering, better workflow stuff, and even better live streams. I was able to live stream sims such as Assetto Corsa Competizione. I was able to stream Automobilista 2 without really any hiccups, and that's one of the things I really wanted out of this system with the upgrades. So yeah, for my case, I feel like this was an incredible upgrade for me, especially worth the price, and definitely something to consider if you are looking to doing more high-end streaming, things like that. And yeah, I mean, that's with the single system streaming that I do. If you're doing a dual system, you don't need it as much, but for me, doing single system streaming, I felt like this was definitely a worthy upgrade. So yeah, this was one of my first ever really in-depth style build vlog videos that I just wanted to give this a try something different. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Did you like this build style vlog, or did you not like it so much? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you did like this video, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, so you can help keep us on track. For the Sim Racing Paddock, I'm William Marsh, and thanks for watching.